My name is Martin Cole, and for the past 19 years, I've worked as the Senior Financial Controller at Alden Core Industries, a manufacturing firm based in Cincinnati, Ohio. Today, that chapter ended in a glass-walled conference room that felt colder than any winter I'd walked through. Before we continue, if stories like this move you, about justice, legacy, and resilience, please remember to subscribe, like, and share this channel. It helps more than you know. Due to restructuring, your position is being eliminated. Rebecca Lang, the new VP, announced without even glancing up from her tablet. Almost 2 decades of loyalty, and this was how I got the news. Sitting across from 2 people who barely knew my name, with security stationed quietly outside the door. "I'll need your badge and parking pass," added Caleb March, sliding a worn-out cardboard box across the table like it was a farewell gift. I nodded once. No protests, no pleas. I just stared for a second at the reflection of Rebecca's red-painted fingernails tapping impatiently on the glass tabletop. "Anything you'd like to say, Martin?" Her voice carried just enough fake sympathy to make it insulting. But thank you for the opportunity." I stood, tightened my tie, a habit my late wife loved, and tucked my leather portfolio under my arm. She gave it to me 15 years ago, just before cancer dimmed her light. Since then, I'd buried myself in budgets and spreadsheets, hoping the silence at home wouldn't crush me. "You'll hear from HR regarding your retirement package," Caleb said, deliberately stressing retirement. We both knew I was 5 years short of full benefits. James from security looked down as he walked me back to my office. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole," he muttered as I gently wrapped my wife's photo in tissue paper. "Not your fault, James." I left my badge on the desk, but not the leather portfolio. Inside it was a flash drive, 3 years' worth of meticulous records. Every questionable vendor invoice, every mysteriously approved wire transfer, every suddenly canceled audit. They thought they were cutting dead weight, just the old accountant who asked too many questions. What they didn't know was that I had been quietly building a case since Rebecca lost those vendor verification forms, since Caleb started pushing out anyone who questioned the new spending patterns. I walked through the lobby, past co-workers who suddenly found their shoelaces very interesting. 19 years of integrity, boxed and buried in polite silence. Only when I reached my car did I allow myself a smile, tight, brief, and real. They thought I was leaving empty-handed. I was leaving with everything they feared most. The drive home felt longer than usual, even though I'd made that same route from Alden Core's downtown office to my quiet cul-de-sac in Oakwood thousands of times. But that afternoon, the streets looked different. Or maybe it was just me. I parked in the driveway, but didn't get out right away. Just sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring at the porch light I'd installed the same week my wife passed. My house hadn't changed, but everything inside me had. When I finally walked in, I set the cardboard box on the kitchen counter like it was something fragile. I poured 2 fingers of scotch. My wife used to call it my thinking glass. The burn in my throat did nothing to quiet the noise in my head. My thoughts drifted back to the beginning, when Alden Core wasn't a brand with glossy PR videos and buzzwords. It was a family-owned company, started by Gerald Alden, a man who used to walk the factory floor before checking his emails. He believed in people, in quality, and in keeping the books clean. Numbers never lie, Martin. But people sometimes do. Your job is to make sure the truth has a voice. He told me that during my interview, back when I still had hair and hope. Things changed after Gerald stepped down. His son, Mason Alden, sold the company to a private equity firm. At first, the changes were small, Extended maintenance cycles, cheaper materials, fewer internal audits. Subtle enough that no one raised alarms. Then came the rebrand. They called it modernizing the business. Rebecca Lang arrived shortly after, all polished confidence and corporate jargon. Caleb wasn't far behind, with his big talk about culture shifts and vision alignment. First, I wanted to believe them. I told myself they were just different, not dishonest. But the first time I flagged a discrepancy during a quarterly review, vendor payments that didn't match our incoming inventory, Rebecca brushed it off with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It'll balance out," she said. It didn't. I followed up by email. No reply. The following week, I saw duplicated expense reports, payments to consulting firms I couldn't verify, and project budgets that ballooned overnight. That's when I started keeping notes. Then a second set of books. I backed everything up, quietly, methodically, because something inside me said the storm wasn't coming. It was already here, and through all of it, I kept hearing Gerald's voice. "Your job is to make the numbers speak the truth." I didn't plan to expose anything. Not back then. I just needed to be able to sleep at night. But now, after today, now the truth might be the only thing that still matters. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my home office with only the soft hum of the desk lamp and the steady tick of the wall clock for company. The flash drive sat on the desk like a quiet witness, packed with files I hoped I'd never have to use. I didn't start collecting that data because I was angry. Not at first. I started because something didn't feel right. Because numbers that used to make sense, used to tell a clear story, had begun whispering things they weren't supposed to. I'd never been a suspicious man. The first 15 years at Alden Corps had been the best of my professional life. There was pride in closing the books each quarter with precision, in seeing the numbers reflect the real effort of hundreds of honest workers. But then came the new leadership. Promotions started going to people fresh out of nowhere. Folks who had vague titles and glossier resumes, but no real history with the company. Meanwhile, veterans like Eric from logistics and Monica from compliance were pushed into early retirement or quietly reassigned to nowhere roles. One day, Greg, who worked in purchasing, stopped by my office and closed the door behind him. "These vendor invoices don't add up," he whispered. "There's no receiving log, no shipping confirmations. Something's off." 2 weeks later, Greg was gone. Officially, it was due to performance concerns. Unofficially, it was because he asked the same questions I did. At home, I tried to pretend everything was fine. My daughter, Riley, freshly made partner at her law firm in Columbus, called more often. "You're working too late, Dad. Are you okay?" she asked during one of her Saturday check-ins. "Just busy season," I lied. I didn't want her worrying. She had her own battles to fight, and I didn't want to add mine to her plate. But every time I looked at her mother's old photo on the shelf, I felt that ache in my chest, that familiar guilt of keeping things buried. Last month, Caleb reorganized the finance department. They inserted a 26-year-old strategic liaison, his nephew, between me and executive-level approvals. That was when I knew they were building a wall around me, a barrier between me and the truth. So I adapted. I made triplicate copies. I started documenting not just numbers, but behaviors. Meeting times, tone of emails, who said what and when. I created a timeline. Every broken safeguard, every shifted policy that let irregularities slip through unnoticed. I wasn't sure what I was building back then, but I knew one day I might have to stand by it. Because Gerald was right all along. Numbers don't lie. But someone has to be brave enough to read them out loud. The next morning felt strange. I got up at the usual time, brewed my coffee the same way I had every weekday for nearly 2 decades, and sat at the kitchen table in silence. But there were no emails to check, no reports waiting on my desk at Aldencore. Just an empty inbox and the tick of the old wall clock. I wasn't used to stillness. It felt unnatural. The leather portfolio lay beside me, its contents more powerful now than any job title I used to hold. I flipped it open and stared at the flash drive inside. Everything I'd compiled was neatly organized by quarter, by department, by incident. Not just spreadsheets, but screenshots, emails, internal memos. Enough to paint a very clear picture. But the question that lingered, louder than ever, was, what now? I wasn't interested in revenge. I didn't want a courtroom battle that would drag on for years and tear open parts of my life I preferred to keep quiet. I just wanted the truth to matter again. I wanted the company Gerald built to be honest again. That's when I thought of James Parker. We hadn't spoken in years, not since my wife's memorial. But I knew what line of work he'd gone into. James had always had a sharp mind for justice. These days, he worked as a federal prosecutor focusing on corporate fraud. I picked up the phone. James, it's Martin Cole. I need to talk to you about something. Sensitive. Financial irregularities at Aldencore? It's more serious than I expected. Can we meet today? There was a pause on the line, the kind that carries weight. How bad is it? He asked. 3 years' worth, maybe more. I have documents, backup logs, vendor data that doesn't match inventory. And something deeper, missing pension funds, red flag consulting firms. The kind of things that don't just happen by mistake. Okay, James said. I'll clear my afternoon. Bring everything. When I hung up, my hands were trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from something else. Clarity. A sense that this wasn't just about me anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about the warehouse guys who worked double shifts to earn their pensions. About the widows and families counting on that money. About Gerald Alden's legacy. That afternoon, I drove into downtown Columbus with the flash drive in my pocket and the weight of 19 years pressing against my ribs. I wasn't sure how deep the rot had gone, but I was finally ready to dig it out, no matter where it led. Because truth, once uncovered, has a way of lighting fires. And I was done sitting in the dark. 2 days after I met with James, a certified letter arrived at my front door. Aldencore's legal department had sent it by courier. No signature required, no apology offered. Inside was a severance agreement that read like a gag order dressed up in corporate language. 3 months' pay for 19 years of service. And in return, I was to promise silence, forever. The document was thick with clauses. I wasn't allowed to speak of internal operations, past or present. No interviews, no collaboration with regulators, no sharing of records. Even those I'd compiled on my own time. It was a muzzle disguised as a generous exit package. I called Riley, my daughter. I hadn't planned to drag her into this, but she was the only person I trusted with both my emotions and the legal fine print. They're scared, she said after scanning the agreement. This language isn't normal severance talk. It's panic disguised as protocol. What happens if I don't sign? I asked. They'll try to freeze your unemployment benefits. Maybe even withhold your unused vacation payout. Legally flimsy, but they're betting you won't want to fight. I thanked her and told her I'd think it over. What I didn't say was that I had already made up my mind. That afternoon, Just as I was gathering some documents from my office, the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't a courier. It was Rebecca Lang herself, standing on my porch in a crisp cream blazer, holding a fresh copy of the severance agreement like it was a peace offering. "Martin," she said, her voice sugary. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." I stepped aside and let her in, but I didn't offer coffee. "We'd really like to close this out quickly," she said, setting the papers on my coffee table. "We're prepared to extend the offer 2 additional months, but only if you sign today." I studied her face. The smile was still there, but it was tight now, strained. "What's the rush?" I asked quietly. Her eyes flicked for just a second. "The board is finalizing next quarter's budget. We need to account for outstanding obligations, like vendor payments." The words slipped from me before I could stop them. "Like the ones sent to Brandon Supply, even though there's no record of receiving inventory?" Rebecca's expression froze. A beat passed, then her voice sharpened. "I'd be cautious, Martin. Throwing around unfounded accusations like that can be dangerous, even defamatory." I leaned back in my chair, steady. "I kept copies of my work product. It's permitted under Aldencor's own employee handbook." She stood abruptly, gathering the paperwork. "I'll give you until tomorrow to reconsider. After that, things could get complicated, especially for your future plans." No threats, not directly. But the meaning was clear. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Back off. We know about the flash drive." The message hit harder than I expected, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed what I already suspected. They weren't just trying to contain a problem. They were trying to erase it. And now, I wasn't just carrying documents. I was carrying risk. And they knew it that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting beneath the surface, just out of sight. I checked the locks twice before bed, even though I lived in a quiet neighborhood. I left a light on in the hallway. And when my phone buzzed at 2:13 a.m., I was already awake. It was Teresa, my old assistant from Aldencor. "Martin, can we meet?" Her voice was low, urgent. "Not in public, not at your house, somewhere off the grid." We arranged to meet the next day at my brother's cabin, an old place near Lake Delaney, about an hour outside Columbus. He was in Florida for the winter, and no one would be watching it. Teresa arrived in a gray sedan, her face pale, eyes darting to every tree like the woods might be hiding someone. She barely let the engine cool before stepping out with a small bag clutched tightly in her hands. Inside, she didn't waste time. "They're running a full audit," she said. "At least, that's what they're calling it. But it's not real. They're rewriting everything, backdating approvals, creating fake documentation. They're trying to cover the gaps." "How do you know?" I asked. "They're using people from Caleb's old consulting firm, but they made a mistake. They're still using your old admin credentials. I can see the access logs. I've been copying them." She handed me a flash drive. Before and after. What was real and what they changed. I held the drive in my hand. It felt impossibly light for something that could bring down a corporation. "You're risking your job," I said quietly. She gave a bitter laugh. "They're eliminating my position next month. I only found out because they accidentally CC'd me on the restructuring memo." What she showed me went far beyond questionable vendor payments or inflated consultant fees. It was coordinated fraud, government contracts being manipulated, safety certifications being faked, and worst of all, phantom inventory used to inflate valuations for investors. "There's more," she said, scrolling through emails on her burner phone. They're selling the entire manufacturing division to a private equity firm. Employees won't find out until it's done. I felt my stomach tighten. The pension fund? Her silence answered before her voice did. They've been drawing from it for over a year. If the sale goes through, there won't be enough left. Hundreds of families. Decades of work. Security turned into ash. Who else knows about this? Just the executive team. And now you. She hesitated, then added, maybe one more. Daniel, from quality control, started asking questions last month. Then he vanished. No termination paperwork. His badge was never turned in. Have you heard from him? She shook her head. His phone goes straight to voicemail. Desk cleared overnight. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the cold crawling down my spine. I kept checking the rearview mirror. The car that had been parked across from my house the last few nights, it was gone. But that didn't make me feel safer. I called Daniel, straight to voicemail, just like she said. I left a message, vague but sincere, just in case. That night, as I lay awake again, I realized something that chilled me more than anything else. This wasn't just financial misconduct anymore. It was something darker, and we were already in the middle of it. By morning, I knew I couldn't wait for the next move. I didn't trust the stillness around me. It felt too intentional, like something was being held back, waiting for me to misstep. So I moved first. I spent the early hours duplicating everything, both my records and the files Teresa gave me. One set went into a safety deposit box at a small credit union downtown. Another set I encrypted and sent to James, along with a physical decryption key delivered by courier. And the third, I gave to Riley, sealed in a folder marked only, "If something happens." She didn't ask questions. She saw it in my eyes. Then I reached out to the only person who might understand what came next. Greg Stillman, purchasing manager who'd been let go months before me. We met at a diner 2 towns over. He looked thinner than I remembered, like the stress had carved into him. "I've been waiting for this call," Greg said after I laid everything out. "I thought maybe I was the only one," I told him. "No," he said. "I saw the same things. Fake invoices, payments to shell vendors. When I started flagging them, I got pulled into HR. They said I was creating a hostile environment." "What happened after?" "My laptop disappeared during a break-in. Nothing else was touched. My external drives were wiped. Cops called it random. I didn't." "Do you still have the police report?" He nodded. "Every file, every note. I've been sitting on it, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. But now?" I leaned forward. "Would you be willing to go on record?" Greg didn't hesitate. I felt like a coward for months. Not anymore. By the end of the day, I had 2 more conversations just like that. Monica, from compliance. Steve, from internal audit. Each of them had stories that mirrored mine, memos that vanished, reports that were quietly rewritten, entire projects that dropped from the system the moment they raised questions. I passed all of it to James. That evening, he called back. "The prosecutor's office is officially interested. But we need one more thing: current data, the pension withdrawals, the active government contracts. If we don't have fresh numbers, they'll say everything was corrected after you left." I rubbed my eyes, already knowing what he was implying. "You want Teresa to go back in. She's already taken huge risks. If they catch her now, I know." But as I hung up, I saw something I hadn't expected. My front yard, empty. The car that had been parked across the street the past few nights, watching, was gone. And somehow, that felt worse than if it had stayed. The next few days blurred into each other, quiet on the surface, but filled with unease underneath. I worked from coffee shops and hotel lobbies, anywhere but home. I didn't trust the stillness of my own street anymore. And then, on a foggy Thursday morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. Martin. The voice was ragged, barely a whisper. It took me a second to place it. Daniel? Listen carefully, he said, urgency coding every syllable. The Benton Ridge contract? Check the inspection reports. Match the certification files to the actual test logs. What are you saying? I asked, stepping outside, scanning the lot behind the cafe. They're passing off defective parts for military vehicles, Martin. They're faking certifications. His breath quickened. I pushed too far. They came after my wife, my kids. Where are you now? Can I help? Number, don't try to find me. Just stop them before someone dies. And then, click. The line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, phone frozen in my grip. The words rang in my ears louder than the passing traffic. Military vehicles, defective parts. This wasn't just about investors and pension funds anymore. About lives. I called James immediately, repeating everything I could remember from Daniel's call. He's alive, I said. But he's running. And if he's telling the truth, this goes beyond corporate crime. James didn't hesitate. This changes everything. I'll notify defense. But we'll need corroboration, documents, email chains, anything pointing to those falsified inspections. My mind raced. I knew where to look. Teresa had mentioned testing logs and backdated approvals. And if Daniel was right, that evidence was already buried somewhere inside Aldencourt's internal systems. We didn't have weeks anymore. Maybe not even days. That night, I slept with the porch light on and the flash drive in my coat pocket. I didn't care if it was paranoid. The knock on Daniel's door could come for me next. And yet, beneath the fear, something else stirred. Determination. Because Gerald Alden built that company with his own hands. Because the workers on that line trusted us to protect more than numbers. Because my wife used to tell me, silence is just another way to say you're okay with it. I wasn't okay with any of it. The truth had been buried deep. But I was already holding the shovel. By the next morning, the decision was made. I wasn't going to wait for another late-night threat or another call from someone in hiding. I had enough. And with Daniel's warning still echoing in my mind, I called James one more time. It's time, I told him. I want to draw them out. He didn't ask what I meant. We'll need a controlled environment, he said. Somewhere we can monitor everything. I know just the place. The Riverside Hotel, east of downtown Columbus. Discreet, quiet, with private conference rooms and a back entrance federal agents could use without tipping anyone off. The plan was simple. I'd pretend to fold. Reach out to Rebecca, suggest I was ready to sign. Play the tired, scared man they thought they'd broken. So I picked up the phone. Rebecca, I said, keeping my voice low, uncertain. I've been thinking about the severance offer. Maybe we could meet. Somewhere neutral. She took the bait faster than I expected. Of course, let's finalize this. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Riverside Hotel, Magnolia Room. I'll bring the paperwork. Agreed. What she didn't know was that room was already wired. Cameras tucked in corners, mics in the walls. James would be watching with a team from the Department of Defense and Federal Prosecutor's Office. That morning, I dressed like I used to for work. Pressed shirt, navy tie, leather portfolio in hand. As I stepped into the Magnolia Room, I felt oddly calm. Rebecca walked in 5 minutes late, wearing confidence like a tailored coat. Her lawyer trailed behind her, eyes alert. She flipped through the papers I'd brought, pausing at the severance agreement she thought would end it all. "This looks in order," she said coolly. "Just one signature, and we can all move on." I picked up the pen. "Just one clarification," I said, steady. "This agreement covers all company matters, correct? Including the Benton Ridge contract and the altered pension fund?" Her lawyer's posture shifted. Rebecca froze. "Of course," she said after a moment. "Standard terms." I nodded. "And would this prevent me from complying with a federal investigation?" "What are you implying?" her lawyer snapped. I set the pen down. "Not implying anything, just clarifying that I've already submitted all evidence to federal authorities, including this conversation." On cue, the door opened. James entered with 2 agents at his side. "Rebecca Lang," one of them said. "We have a warrant to search all Alden Corps properties and seize records related to government contracts and employee benefit programs." Rebecca's face drained of color. Her lawyer reached for his briefcase, but it was too late. Everything was in motion now. "I'd advise against using your phone," the agent added. "Mr. March and several board members are being detained as we speak." I didn't stay for the full spectacle. My part was done. As I stepped outside into the crisp morning air, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Relief. And beneath that, something stronger. The quiet satisfaction of knowing the truth had finally spoken loud enough to be heard. 6 months later, I stood inside the old Alden Corps manufacturing facility, now bearing a new sign above the main entrance. Alden Legacy Industries. The hum of machinery had returned, steady and familiar. The same steel tracks ran along the ceiling. The same scent of coolant lingered in the air. But everything else had changed. After the investigation, after the arrests, the company was placed in receivership. And from that wreckage, something remarkable happened. A coalition of longtime employees, machine operators, supervisors, line leads, banded together. With assistance from a state revitalization fund, they bought back the core of what Alden Corps used to be. And they asked me to help rebuild it. Not as a controller or executive, not as anything with a title, just as someone who remembered how things used to be and how they could be again. So I helped them set up a transparent financial system, one where every transaction had oversight, where no line item went unchecked. Not for control, for trust. As I signed out at the front desk one final time, James, the same security guard who once escorted me out in silence, nodded respectfully. "All done for the day, Mr. Cole?" "Just about," I said, returning my visitor badge. Outside, Riley waited in her car, the engine running, her smile soft but proud. "How's it looking in there?" she asked as I settled into the passenger seat. "Good," I said, glancing back at the factory one more time. "Better than good. They'll be fine without me now. They've got their foundation back." Gerald Alden's voice echoed in my mind again. "Numbers don't lie, Martin, but they need someone who knows how to listen." The news had long since moved on. Executives indicted, plea deals struck, headlines replaced by newer scandals. But what mattered most wasn't the noise. It was the outcome. The pension fund had been partially restored, enough that most of the retirees wouldn't lose their homes. Rebecca and Caleb were awaiting trial. The former CEO had turned state's evidence. As for me, I packed away my records, my reports, and my flash drives. Filed, labeled, and no longer needed. I wasn't carrying the weight anymore. The next morning, I started a quiet new chapter, working part-time as a financial ethics consultant, helping small manufacturers build systems that would make it harder for the next Rebecca to ever gain ground. Not flashy work, not glamorous, but meaningful. And for a 59-year-old accountant who once just wanted the numbers to tell the truth, it was more than enough. A week after my last visit to the factory, I was asked to attend one more meeting. This time in the same break room where I'd once shared morning coffee with machinists and shift supervisors. But today, the mood was different. Hopeful. A group of employees, now board members of Alden Legacy Industries, had invited me to present the proposal I'd spent the last month building. Plan to rebuild the broken pension fund. I stood in front of them with a simple binder in hand. No flashy charts, just clear math. We can't fix the past, I told them, but we can design something better going forward. The plan involved 3 pillars. Redirecting a percentage of quarterly profits into a protected fund. Partnering with a regional credit union for ethical investment oversight. And establishing a transparent, employee-led audit process to ensure no one could ever touch that money again without collective approval. When I finished, no one applauded. They didn't need to. One by one, heads nodded, eyes brimmed with quiet agreement. Raphael, a line technician nearing retirement, stood and asked, "Will it be enough for guys like me?" I didn't lie. Not everything will be recovered. But if we do this right, no one else will have to go through what you did. And we'll protect what's left. Together. In that moment, I wasn't an outsider anymore. Just someone who had come full circle. If this kind of story meant something to you, if you believe in accountability, redemption, and the power of people standing up for each other, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these voices be heard. Because sometimes, the most important numbers aren't profits or stock prices. They're the ones that represent dignity, retirement, and the people who gave their lives to build something real.